Hello, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Today we are going to do part 3 of Average Folks in the Afterlife. And I just want you to know I have my tie-dye t-shirt on today. I'm not listening to the Grateful Dead, but I might later. And the Grateful Dead, that's a good one. Some more readings from the literature of psychic communication, of which I have an inordinate supply. This is from a book called Living On, A Study of Altering Consciousness After Death by Paul Beard, published in 1980. And it is something of an anthology book in that it quotes from many, many channeled sources and has that advantage of not representing merely one point of view, but a variety of points of view. Something I find instructive and useful, to say the least. And that's really why we're doing this at all, because of my own experiences in my own books. There's quite a bit of representation already, and I don't feel you need to hear any more from me at that this juncture. And other sources are more interesting at this point, even to me. So a few sections here, quotes from various sources. As I say, Paul Beard quotes from a number of channeled sources. And you'll just get to see how people find their surroundings when they first pass. These are all quotes from various sources, I might add. There are things of the same kind as you see on earth, only somehow different. They are real, but you have a sense that they are only temporary, that they just belong to that first waking stage. Then you find, and it seems very curious and fascinating, that you can change those things by wishing them to change. You can only do it with quite small and unimportant things. But for instance, you can look at a pine needle on the ground where you are sitting and begin to think of it as a real needle, a steel needle. And then it is an ordinary sewing needle and you can pick it up. You can't change big things. You can't change the whole scene around you. That is because it is not only your scene, but it belongs to lots of other spirits too. But you can change any little thing when the change won't affect anybody else. Then you begin to realize that all the things around you are really thought forms, and that it is arranged like that so as to make the transition easy from material life to spirit life. You learn a great deal simply by finding out what you can change by changing your own thought about it, and what remains unaltered however you think about it. That makes you understand how little belongs to you alone, so that you can do exactly what you like with it individually, and how much belongs to the whole concourse of spirits of which you are part. And another account. You are part of the tree, in tune with it. It feeds you and you respond to it in that you recognize it as a reflection of God's love, as you are a reflection of God's love. It emits a sound like a tiny, beautiful bell. Again, quite impossible to describe, but you hear it within yourself and respond spiritually. The flowers can dance and sing in their own particular way. Everything gives you of itself in a conscious, overwhelming generosity of joy, and you reciprocate, sharing everything around you with this giving and taking. Paul Beard compares that afterlife experience with a couple of people's mystical experiences while they're still on Earth, and I think it's interesting to make the comparison. And here are two experiences on Earth. I was walking on the lawn looking at the masses of flowers in the herbaceous border. As a gardener, I was interested in what was coming up into flower, and as an artist, I was enjoying the combination of color, light, and shade. Suddenly, I was lifted into another world. I did not seem to be inside myself, though I was still looking normally at the flower border. Everything had become 1,000 times more brilliant. Everything had also become transparent. But what was so amazing was that I was not only seeing the colors, I was hearing the colors. Every color was an indescribably exquisite musical sound, the whole making a harmony that no instruments could produce. I do not know how long this illumination lasted, perhaps not more than a second or two, but as I came back to Earth, so to speak, I knew I had been in reality. The memory of it has remained vivid and real ever since, and it has brought me the greatest happiness and understanding. Now I know. And another experience from another source. I was on the downs and felt the conditions change. I became aware of faculties which normally I have not at all. I could hear each little blade of grass vibrating, and there was harmony in every note. I could see an aura to every flower. I seemed to be conscious of being in a quite new world. My material body was forgotten. I felt an inward world of color, music, and scent, and perfect peace and happiness. I am sure there is something there with movement, color, and sound which gives happiness. I am really rather an active sort of person. All my friends call me extremely practical. Somebody channeled, Jane Sherwood channeled T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, in one of her books. And here's a little quote from that Paul Beard thinks is quite interesting, and I agree. There has been an unreal quality in my surroundings, and in myself a feeling of shadowy and unsubstantial being. I still miss the weight of my earth body, I suppose, although I should be sorry now to have to drag it about. My present body, solid as it seems, is now really composed of a kind of matter which on earth I thought was emotion. This feeling stuff, emotion, is now exterior to the real me and has no physical drag to slow down its activity. Hence the frightening release of emotional energy and the impossibility of masking it. Frightening release of emotional energy. That's a telling phrase, and we'll get back to T.E. Lawrence on another one. He had lots of interesting experiences to relate. Here's another reflection from another source. Remarkable is the impression of time, which is not measured in the same way as on earth. Thus it seemed to me that I had spent at least several months in the Elysian fields, or what I took for them. It was a state of serene bliss, of complete relaxation. In the beginning I was more or less conscious of the presence of loved and familiar faces. It seemed to me as though all around me there were large and fresh fields covered with flowers. I was constantly surrounded by this golden haze, but I rather felt things rather than actually saw them. I saw a great many things that were new to me. I walked about, met many an old friend and some new ones, so that I had the impression of having lived here already for a long time. Gradually I was overcome by weariness. I wanted a regenerating bath. When my attention turned towards you again, I realized that this lapse of time, so long and full, corresponded to 3 or 4 terrestrial days. 3 or 4. And some philosophical reflections from Frederick Myers, an active psychical researcher in his life, and one more prone to philosophizing about the after-death state and describing it. But an interesting point here. Nearly every soul lives for a time in this state of illusion. The large majority of human beings, when they die, are dominated by the conception that substance is reality, that their particular experience of substance is the only reality. They are not prepared for an immediate and complete change of outlook. They passionately yearn for familiar though idealized surroundings. Their will is merely to live, therefore in the past. So they enter that dream I call illusion land. For instance, Mr. Jones, who represents the unthinking man in the street, will desire a glorified brick villa in a glorified Brighton. He naturally gravitates towards his acquaintances, all those who were of a like mind. But he is merely dreaming all the time, or rather, living within the fantasy created by his strongest desires on earth. Those reunited by crimes. A small paragraph from another source. An old man came over here after an earth life that was by no means exemplary. He was a thief who had killed a man during one of his expeditions, and as soon as he arrived here, he met his victim. He did not know how to express his sorrow, but the victim had no ill feeling and told him that he was grateful for his release from a wretched earth life. He set to work to teach the old man that he must atone for his bad life, but that the punishment was automatic and not vindictive. After a time, the murderer and his victim became fast friends and made progress together. It is not always the apparently good people who get on quickly over here. So, a little reflection on some of the lower realms by a communicator called Francis Banks. There are also hells, though certainly differing from the physical hells and everlasting fiery torments of man's warped imagination. There are confining states of misery, dark, repressing, and as real as the tortured consciousness of the dweller therein makes them. Yet these hells are not eternal. The man or woman in these mental torments need stay there no longer than his desires keep them. He is free to resist the hatreds, cruelties, lusts of his lower nature, which he has retained from his earth life, and which are keeping him in the dark dungeons amid like-minded inhabitants. He can always choose to follow the light of love, forgiveness, and harmony, and always there are souls ready to help, guide, and comfort and assist. No soul is ever left comfortless unless they wish it. That sounds like a paradox, but then much that we learn here is very different from the teachings of man, even good men who are limited in their ideas. Existence on earth is a state of living in a thought world, illusory and much more restricted and enclosed by the glamorous web of matter. Beyond physical death, the thought world is more apparent and certainly far more potent in its effects. Cause and effect is still the law on this plane of astral matter, as it is on earth. The Shadowland is a very real place indeed. A gloomy murk covers it, to which one has to become accustomed. Squalid dwellings inhabited by unhappy, tormented beings, who jeer and mock and pursue their warped existences. Sometimes these poor souls live in hatred and rebellion, sometimes in apathy, and sometimes with a fierce denial that there is any other state of existence possible. And I would certainly concur with that in my own experiences. You go to those lower realms and, hang out a bit and, adopt some of their mannerisms and their attitudes just to make them feel comfortable, and you tell them that there's a better place to go to. They just won't believe you. They think you're some, do-gooder Christian guy, trying to, rope them into your religion or whatever. And, or it's some hopeless New Age idealist, if that's what they knew on Earth. But, they're hard to convince. Anyway, I think we'll move on to another book. This is something we'll come back to, but a book called The Awakening Letters, Cynthia Sands, Rosamund Leman. More automatic writing, published in 1978, and letters, as the lady says, from a variety of sources. Here's a good one from a doctor, a general practitioner. As I say, automatic writing. May I write? I was a doctor on Earth, and I knew you all intimately. My name is Sykes. I was very fond of you all, but I had no use for religion or faith healing, or any of those sentimental emotions. Pain was far too real to be tackled like that. I suffered and came over in a rather battered state of mind. There seemed to be so much useless suffering and unhappiness, and it seemed to be all without rhyme or reason. Then I woke up in a hospital. I had died at home and could not think how I'd got there. But it was a most wonderful place, and I became instantly so much excited by what I saw and felt that I had no idea that I was looking at etheric treatment. A doctor came over to me and asked how I was feeling, adding, "We shall be glad to teach you all we know." Well, I wasn't asking anything except in my own mind, but he was answering my unspoken thought. I found myself wondering if my blood pressure could be taken, and he replied at once, "Yes, if you like, but we don't need to here. The blood circulates quite differently." What did he mean? He sat down beside me, and out of nowhere a diagram appeared showing the organs and arteries of my new body. "This is what you've got to work on now," he explained. I thought I must be going mad. Here was a diagram of a body similar in shape to the one I knew, but with feeding ducts, digestive organs, and so on, of a much simpler kind. I noticed all the pressure points of the body were marked with, quote, light intake, color intake, heat intake, and so on. The digestive organs seemed to be on a rotary system. It looked like one large flywheel that drew in from all sides the white and colored rays, transforming them into energy and life, such as I am now experiencing. After a few moments, he sensed I couldn't take in any more. The diagram vanished and I slept, thinking. The next thing I remember, I was hearing music, lovely deep music like a church organ. I felt as though it were putting strength and weight into me. If I had felt lightened before, that had now gone. I was being fed. That was the sensation, definitely fed on music, and when I became replete, I slept again. May I write again sometime? Later. Yes, I should like to go on. I told you that I came over here with no understanding or belief in the spiritual life. I did not deny it existed, but it was far too disassociated from ordinary life as to be completely out of touch with the ordinary man and woman. Now I found it was me and people like me who were deflecting the healing rays from reaching the earth. Of course, I am most deeply ashamed and have taken great trouble and care to learn the way of passing it into your bodies. I know you all very well on both sides of the curtain of life, and I also know that you are often imploring aid for others, so I would like to work through you and your husband. That's the channel here. Will you let me? Look upon me as the doctor whom you knew and explain the trouble to me in mind, and I ask that the power which surrounds and interpenetrates us all may be focused for the greater health of those whom you want to heal. I would like to go on telling you about my experiences on first coming over here. I told you about the diagram of the etheric body and how I took in all I could and then I slept. On waking, I found the same man beside me. He asked me at once if I would like to come into the operating theatre. I said yes, but I must dress first. Then I realized how strange it all was. The moment I got out of bed, I was dressed. and I was feeling well and rested and eager to learn anything. He took my arm to steady me as the ground seemed to rise and fall, and I had no power of balancing in my new body. We floated out through the wall to my great amazement, and found ourselves in a garden with a lake surrounded by enormous trees. When we reached the edge of the lake, he made as though he wanted to push me in, but I found instead that I was sliding above the lake without touching the water. And fearing that that spell should break, and I should fall in with a splash at any moment, I determined to accept it as all quite natural, and tried to think of the lake not as a watery lake at all, and soon I had many other things to think about. Walking on water. Happens a lot over there. In the center, radiating outwards on all sides, were beautiful colored rays, flashing such bright colors, but that by the time we reached the center, I was feeling terribly giddy. The doctor, sensing my discomfort, at once said, "Look down," which I did, into a blue of such healing calm that the giddiness left me at once. Then he said, "Look up." And again I met this strange, mesmeric asleep or unconscious. Well. Many of these people had crippled, twisted bodies. I saw the helpers lay them on a horizontal position on a ray, using it as though it were a table. Straighten out their limbs quite simply, then focus another ray upon them, and then, and still in a deep sleep state, float them away out of sight. I was gasping with questions, and my doctor friend needed no further vocal word, but started off at once to explain. These were mostly the etheric bodies of people who had suffered from polio or been crippled or paralyzed in some way. They all had to be treated before they woke up, and it was all quite simple. He explained there was no illness of the etheric body. They only became crumpled like a dress, which is always being worn crooked. They have to be straightened and strengthened, and that is all. I asked what would happen if we did that on Earth. He said, "It all depends on the patient. Here no one thwarts you in mind, while on the physical plane they are always searching for a physical explanation. But if the human mind could accept simple healing, it would be healed." So my first treatment is, straighten your body when you go to bed so that the force can flow up and down without hindrance. Thank you. I should like to go on. It's the most extraordinary thing, but I feel so much better, more myself, less vague, and far more composed after I have been writing through you. It seems to focus my mind by giving me a sense of that rock-like existence which it was on the physical plane. I see now that I have lived a very narrow life with very few new ideas, and it's such a hard job breaking up the habits of 70-odd years. But we have to do it. No one makes us, but we have to become elastic in mind and body. I must tell you that I felt very cumbersome when we first started writing. It was all so new to me. But I feel already that you are pushing me on, giving me an incentive to work through you on the physical plane, where my heart and mind are still active. I had no idea that this was possible, nor was it to this extent in my day, but now there are many, many doctors over here who are ready and anxious to work through you. I was starved of opportunity. I never met the big men of my day, and I longed to be in the swim. Now I feel I am right there, and it's most intoxicating. That is why I said writing with you makes me realize the constriction of earthly life again, and the feeling of the inability to heal, which was so often my lot. Now I see no reason for any healing whatsoever to fail. When you send us to anyone in need of healing, try and do so during the hours when they would normally be sleeping. Then we have the ego out of gear, as it were, with the clutch running freely. This time of sleep is most vital. Sleep corrects the whole setup of the mental machine. So when you prepare for sleep, you cannot take too much trouble, either for yourself or your patients. The quiet drift into sleep is the vital moment. I'll finish with a slightly more somber one, but amusing in the end. Again, this is a communication from one of the psychics, the husband who had passed. And he has several communications, some of which I'll read later, but let me finish with this one. The Executioner's Island. When you were at the hotel on the island, I saw and spoke to several wraiths. So I'm assuming the living wife was on an island, and he spoke to, some ghosts. I saw and spoke to several wraiths who were most unhappy and horrified. I discovered that they had been executioners, and as their lives were sought by all the townsfolk, they went in fear of their lives. And after their lives, which all seemed to have ended violently, they continued in this state. I said, "What are you afraid of?" "Everything," was the answer. "Excepting you. You bring such a sense of calm." Rather pleased, I went on. "Have you never left this island?" "No, no, we can't leave it. If we do, we shall be killed horribly." "But you are already dead. You can't suffer bodily pain any more." They looked at me in astonishment and said, "But we are alive. We have bodies." "Yes, so do I pointed out, "but I have been dead for 18 months." They looked at me aghast. One of them bravely asked if I could help them escape from the island. I said, "Yes, at once," and greatly to their astonishment, we floated out through the ceiling. I heard one say, "He must be right, you know. I could never have done this before." On landing, they caught the sight of a car on the wharf and asked me what it was. I realized that they were still living in the 15th century, so explained briefly that it was a kind of traveling coach. They looked puzzled and asked where the horses were, as they saw it move without any. I tried to tell them that it was now several centuries since their death in the body, but they frankly refused to believe a word of it. So I said, "Well, go off and find out for yourselves." Coming back a little time later, they clung to me and said they'd seen no one there they knew. The whole place was changed, and no one spoke to them. I explained that they were invisible to those in the body, being now in their spirit bodies, but they couldn't take it in, and kept on reverting to their old lives. Then suddenly one of them stood up and groaned, "Look, look, there is Alexis!" And looking in the same direction, I saw a man who might have belonged to their period. He came towards us, and on recognizing them, he said with horror, You here? I thought I'd left you behind forever." My party were cowering in terror by this time, and I was trying to shield them. I asked the stranger what he had against them. "Against them? They are the executioners. I was one of their victims." "Don't worry," I replied. "They are now your victims. Look at them." And with that he laughed and said, "Yes, it's all over really. It was just the sense of the old bitterness. Now it is past, and I will help them." Which he proceeded to do, and gaining courage, they left me to follow him. Many more instructive and amusing tales in that book, I might add. We will go on as eternity goes on, as the afterlife goes on. There is no ending of anything, just transformation. Change is the only constant. Keep thinking of that old song by Yes. You'll see perpetual change. They were right. You will see perpetual change. So long from the Word of Gord. So long from the afterlife. And all them average folks, just like you and me.